Let's go. Momentum at the movies, week 1, people. Let's do this. Been doing this for like 20 years, all right? Here we go. All right, so by round of applause, how many of you have seen or read The Life of Chuck? Everyone. Awesome. That's great. That's great. Man, this is a beautiful movie. It is such great storytelling. I loved it. It is probably the best movie in the series that we're doing this year, seriously. Next week might be the best message in the series, but man, this movie's so good. So Life of Chuck is adapted from a short story by Stephen King, okay? And Wikipedia calls it a fantasy drama. IMDb is trying to throw in all the genres that you could call it, which includes drama, fantasy, sci-fi, which is all true. It's kind of IMDb calls it genre bending, so you can't really pin it down to one genre. One critic called it's a wonderful life for today. And that's very accurate, I would say. And so shame on you for being people with responsibilities and work and people to take care of and children to feed, that you didn't watch this movie already. What is wrong with y'all? Okay, so what's it about? Well, that's hard to pin down, honestly. It is a story layered. It's a story that's emotional and existential, and it's told in reverse chronological order, which is going to be slightly confusing, but it begins with Act 3, then it goes to Act 2, Act 1. Act 3, the first one, begins the opening segment with the world is ending. I mean, the world is collapsing, and there's a high school teacher that we meet whose name is Marty. And Marty is teaching class, and there's only a few people in the class because the world has been collapsing. And the word begins to spread through class that there was a giant earthquake and a chunk of California, a huge chunk, just fell into the ocean. And as we continue to hear in Act 3, there's all kind of apocalyptic disasters that are happening. We're not seeing them all. They're more in the news and in the background as we just see some regular people live out their lives. But there are floods, volcanoes, famines, plagues. There are whole species of birds and fish that are dying out. And one character says it just won't stop. So clearly, without debate, it is the end times. It's the final days. And in fact, it's not just our world. The whole universe is dying. So amidst this chaos and bizarre, stuff that's going on, there are these crazy announcements celebrating someone named Charles Krantz that start appearing everywhere. So on the way home from work one day, that high school teacher Marty that I told you about, he's on his way home and he's stuck in gridlock traffic in a little downtown area. And he's sitting there stuck in traffic, and he looks up, and on the side of a bank building is this huge billboard that says, Charles Krantz, 39 great years. Thanks, Chuck. And he looks at this big billboard, and he's like, what is that about? And these bizarre announcements start popping up everywhere, in radio ads and in TV spots, celebrating the life of Chuck, this Charles Krantz guy. But no one seems to know who he is. And there's billboards and all this stuff going on. And at one point, Marty, that high school teacher, is on the phone with his ex-wife. And he's talking to her, and they're talking about how the world's just collapsing. It's going down the drain. He's like, yeah, but luckily Charles Krantz is celebrating 39 great years of service. And they both laugh because they've both seen the billboards and the ads and all that stuff. And he says, how does Chuck Krantz rate this kind of coverage? I mean, he looks like an accountant. I've never heard of him. And they both kind of laugh about that. Well, the next morning, then Marty, the high school teacher, goes outside, and he's talking to his neighbor, which is played by Matthew Lillard. Spoiler alert, one of the killers from Scream 1. Matthew Lillard is out there, and he's the neighbor, and he's this happy, smiley, goofy dude who's like, hey, you're not trying to get to work, are you? Because there's a giant sinkhole that's opened up right next to that bank that had this billboard, and the commute's crazy. You're going to have to go this way and around this way. It's going to add, you'll be lucky to get there by lunch. And he, with this real smiley personality, is kind of given the litany of all this, the liturgy of all these things that have gone wrong in the world. And as he's talking, you hear an airplane somewhere in the sky, And all of a sudden, Matthew Lillard's character stops. He's like, what is that? Skywriting? Man, I haven't seen one of those since I was a kid. And what do you think the plane's spelling? Thanks, Chuck. He's like, what in the world is going on? There's one character later on who says, it's all Krantz all the time. One person even says, he is the final meme as the world is ending. This guy, Chuck, is the final meme. But here's the deal. No one knows who he is. Who is this guy? Grab a paperback Bible under the chair in front of you. Turn to Psalm 139, or if you have your own Bible, or you can download the Bible app for free because I said so. And in the Old Testament, there's a lot of stuff about God's relationship and agreement with a whole nation, Israel, and the stuff that they've agreed. Okay, God, you're going to be our God. We're going to obey you. You're going to do what you say. We'll be your people. But this is a psalm, which is a written prayer or a poem or a song that is incredibly personal. A lot of times it's so much about the relationship in the Old Testament, pre-Jesus born in Bethlehem, about God and this nation. But here's one guy in that nation who writes a psalm, a written out prayer, poem, song, that is just incredibly personal. And the psalmist it's attributed to a warrior king whose name is David, who came into the public eye in Israel when he whipped a giant 1v1 in a battle. And his fame began to spread. Eventually, he became king. But in the first stanza of Psalm 139, verses 1 through 6, David is speaking directly to God. This is a written out prayer. It's very poetic. And it begins with the subheading for the director of music of David, meaning this is a psalm by David, a psalm. And in verse 1, he says, you have searched me, God, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Now, the first stanza here by David it describes God's omniscience. The fact that he is an all-seeing and all-knowing God. But that isn't just some theological fact about God, some truth. To the psalmist, David's saying, this is incredibly personal. You know everything there is to know about me. Like, that's the kind of God you are. Every detail of my daily routine, every unspoken thought, you know me, God, so well. And so David uses this really cool poetic technique called merism, M-E-R-I-S-M, which is basically an approach where you mention two polar opposites to represent the whole. It's a poetic way of saying everything, okay? So David says, you know when I sit down and when I rise. He's saying, you know all that I do, but it's a poetic way of saying it, you know? And so it's a fancy pants way that a poet says something. Instead of saying every, all, or always, he's like, from this to this, you know everything about me. And here's kind of the point, is you might be a quote-unquote nobody. Just you're living a simple, quiet life. You're a complete unknown, to reference another movie from within the last year. You might be a complete unknown like Charles Krantz. But maybe you've never made, some big splash in the world. You've never been in the news. You've never won an award. You've never broken a record, anything like that. But I want you to know this morning what David knows, and that is that God knows everything about you. Knows every detail about when you rise and when you sit down, from the time you get up and go to bed, all of your unspoken thoughts, including your secret sacrifices that you make, including secret vices that you have, including your pain, including your trauma, including the simple things that bring you joy in life. God knows all of it. God knows everything about you, and the psalmist is awestruck. The guy who wrote this psalm, he is awestruck at the fullness of God's knowledge about his life. Stanza 2, starting in verse 7. And I'll just read a short part of it. He says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, this is another merism, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, Sheol, the resting place of the dead, You are there. No matter where I go, he's saying, you are there, everywhere. So this stanza is about the all-present God. And it isn't just a theological fact and truth about God. He's like, you're with me everywhere I go. If I wanted to, I couldn't escape you. God, you are in every part of my life, everywhere I'm at. I couldn't escape you if I wanted to. There's an English dude who lived in the past. His name is Francis Thompson, and he wrote a famous poem that is actually comes largely from this stanza, from this psalm. He studied medicine for 8 years, from 18 years old to 26 years old. But then he left home because he wanted to pursue his desire to be a writer and a poet. And as sometimes happens with people who leave home who want to be artists, he ends up homeless. And he ends up living in the street, the typical, like this is actual starving artist kind of stuff. And so he ends up homeless on the streets of London for 3 years. And he got addicted to opium. So now he's an addict and he's homeless and he's living on the street. But his medical training and his time on the streets gave him this gritty view of reality and a social conscience. It just made him care about people and their troubles and things that they've been through. And so Francis Thompson, he knew Psalm 139, what we're looking at, and he believed that God is all present within our world, present in all things and in all experiences. And some of you have potentially heard about his most famous poem. It's called The Hound of Heaven. Has anyone ever heard that title? So the Hound of Heaven, it's God. The idea that God is in pursuit of an individual and he's everywhere you could go. There's no place to escape God. And he talks about how God was the Hound of Heaven in his life. And so think about this is a guy who was white collar studying, medicine, and he was no collar, shirtless, homeless, addicted. And so he writes this is just one part. If you don't like poetry, and I'm not a big poetry fan, okay? You're going to get some poetry today a little bit, and I apologize in advance because it's not my thing. But even if you're like, man, I don't get this, it's old English, read the first stanza of this poem a few times, and you will get it. And there's one thing that's kind of a refrain in this poem. He says this as part of the poem. It's like a refrain or a hook. Thompson writes, from those strong feet, capital F, because he's talking about God, from those strong feet that followed after. But with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy or urgency, they beat, and a voice beat, more instant than the feet. All things betray thee, who betrayest me. Now what he's saying is, if you turn your back and try to run from me, God, the Heavenly Father who loves you more than anyone, if you betray me and try to run from me, everything in life will betray you. You will have no peace. You will run, look over your shoulder, but I will always be there, the Hound of Heaven, pursuing you. And so we're sinful humans. And at times we try to run and hide, and it's like a child running from their parents straight into traffic. Like we have no idea, like this is love pursuing us. But fortunately for the psalm writer, he realizes that God is not his true enemy. And in verse 10, he appreciates that the long arm of God is motivated solely by love. Verse 10, even there, no matter where I go, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. And so God grasping his hand is a sign of God's constant presence. And basically what he's saying is no matter where I am, if I hold on to God's hand and let him lead me, God's got me. It doesn't matter where I am, how dark of a place I am. I can't escape your presence. You are everywhere, God. And then stanza 3, the one that we're really aiming at this morning, starting with verse 13, says this. David says, for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Now notice, this is a rare feminine metaphor for God. This is really cool. God is knitting. And he's like, this is what you did when I was in the womb. You knit me together. He said, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works, God, are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you. When I was made in the secret place, I was woven together in the depths of the earth. So this right here it takes a poetic step forward. It went from knitting to weaving, like even more intricate, the complex patterns and colors of a weaver or an embroiderer, just very, very creative and specific and detailed. So this stanza is all about the all-powerful God, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-present, now all-powerful, and God's omnipotence is displayed through his creative ability. Now this is cool. Genesis 1, the first chapter of the Bible, it is about the creation of the universe, the creation of our world. I mean, you're talking plants and animals and people. But in this chapter, the psalmist David describes his own creation. Like this is God creating a person and knitting together a person and their personality and weaving them. It is so individual. It is so personal. And in fact, the unformed body, David's talking about his unformed body, is clearly an embryo. David, the future king, is in his embryonic state. Then my frame, literally in the Hebrew, it's my bone. And so you're picturing the psalmist's little baby skeleton inside of his mother. Then there's the secret place, which is the mother's womb. And this whole stanza is emphasizing our prenatal fashioning by God, a powerful reminder of the value that God sets on us even as embryos. And then verse 14, you see that his own creation, God creating him, is something incredibly existential. Like my life, my existence is given meaning by the fact that you created me, God. You are the one who knit me together, and he credits his existence to the creative, powerful, loving God. And so this is a reason for praise and worship. And he says in verse 14, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, let me just say, Hebrew is a complex. I took a lot of Greek in college, which is what the New Testament is written in. The Old Testament is written in Hebrew. I took exactly Hebrew. I didn't take any Hebrew, but it is a complicated with beautiful symbols. Like this is Hebrew right here, and it probably, I don't know, says donkey butt. I don't know. I think it says Zion in ancient Hebrew, my son's name, but it could say anything because I don't know Hebrew well. But I do know in this verse, which is incredibly hard to translate, this verse is, it says, I praise you because I'm fearfully. Oh, but in the Hebrew, there's actually no conjunction here. That's kind of like trying to translate the best they can. I praise you because I am fearfully, wonderfully, and there's also no verb in the Hebrew. So this is interesting, but the Hebrew could legitimately be translated, I praise you because I am awesomely wonderful. Now, this isn't David walking around with like a pimple imp. Yo, man, I praise you because I'm awesomely wonderful, man. You ought to bow down. Look at me. The abs. I whipped that giant with like, so that's not what David's doing here. He's saying, I praise you because I know that all of your works are amazing. They're wonderful. I know that full well, and I am one of those works. Like, I praise you because I'm awesomely wonderful. When I think about the human body and the way that when I get cut, it heals itself. And the stuff that I store in my memory banks and some of the stuff that I don't store in my memory banks. And just all the thing that is a human. You made me awesomely wonderful. He's in awe. It's a reason for praise. He's like, this is crazy. What you did here is fearful or awesome and amazing. And all the gifts you've given me and the experiences you've given me and the relationships on and on. Now, to dudes in the room, you might be like, okay, that's a lot of poetry. That's really fluffy. That's a great verse for a girl to memorize. Remember, this is David the giant slayer. Every person needs this affirmation that God, you created me and knitted me together and wove who I am. And I'm so detailed and complex that I'm awesomely wonderful, and I praise you because you make good stuff. And I can sit around and whine about how I look and whine about my life, whine about the gifts I don't have, but you've made me awesomely wonderful. I'm not going to spit in your face. I'm going to say, this is incredible. This is unbelievable. And so we need this affirmation. And then the last verse of the stanza, verse 16, the Hebrew here is very cryptic, But the message is clear. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Now, throughout Scripture, there's other places where the scrolls or books of God appear, but they're things like a list of names of who has bowed the knee to Jesus and been written in the Lamb's book of life, meaning because you've received salvation from Jesus, you will be in heaven and receive eternal life. This is the only mention of something like this. Well, it's really cryptic and unclear exactly what this means. Basically, it's saying when we are unborn in the womb, the Lord has purpose for our undeveloped embryonic life, whether that is a future king like David or whether that is a regular guy like Chuck. That's what this is all about, and I praise you for this, God. You have a plan for me. So Chuck's life is pretty simple. Honestly, he's an ordinary Midwestern accountant, and that's his job. And his career symbolizes reliability, routine, and the ordinary. I mean, it's the hidden soundtrack of an unremarkable life. It's just something so simple. Like nobody's ever like, man, I really missed my opportunity to be an accountant. I mean, I think the door was open there once, and I just didn't have the guts to go through that door. I could have been an accountant. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. Now, I'm not saying if you're an accountant, but this is the point is, it's a metaphor for this is just a regular guy with regular skills. And so Chuck is a guy who is gifted with numbers and accounting, but we find out through the movie, which I'll leave up to you to watch, is it's through his grandfather's influence that he becomes an accountant. But he loves to dance, which is a major part of this film that I won't ruin for you. But that's through his grandmother's influence. And there's this depth and complexity to even the things that he does as a profession and the things that he enjoys as his passions. At one point, the narrator, Ron Swanson, that is actually who narrates the film, and that's classic just hearing his voice. But obviously you don't care, so I'm moving on. The narrator says this about Chuck. He says, his life is narrower than the one he once hoped for, but he's made peace with that. He understands that narrowing is the natural order of things. He has a wife, Jenny, to whom he is scrupulously faithful, and an intelligent, good-humored son in middle school. He also only has 9 months to live, though he doesn't know that yet. And so this film invites us to see that even these everyday roles, they hold quiet depth and purpose. He's an accountant. He's a husband. He's a father. But there is such profound depth in each one of these things. And even the things that he enjoys doing, there's such depth in that. One of the most important scenes that happens on Chuck's last day of 6th grade. So it's a different actor. It's little Chuck, as his grandpa calls him, Chucko. He's in the last day of 6th grade, and his idealistic teacher, Mrs. Richards, is standing in front of an unruly class reading Walt Whitman. Here we go back to poetry again. And the class, it's like the 9:30 service. None of them are paying attention to her. They're just all doing their own thing. And there's one kid, Chucko, who's glued in. He's paying great attention, like my friend Jane Bush. She's locked in. She's the one Chucko in the crowd with you knuckleheads doing whatever you want. So she's reading Walt Whitman to a bunch of 6th graders. No one's listening except Chuck. And so one of the lines from Walt Whitman's poem, Song of Myself, one line says this, I contain multitudes. That's typical poetry. You're like, what does that mean? I contain multitudes. Well, after class, Chuck goes up to the teacher, and he says, what does he mean when he says, I am large, I contain multitudes? And she smiles, pleased that just someone was listening, which is how I feel after the 9:30 service. Just one person was listening. Lord, please make an impact on that one. Okay, so she smiles, pleased that someone was listening, and she says, what do you think it means, Chuck? She would be a great Mo group leader. Like, this is how you deflect right back to the people. Like, hey, what does it mean when Jesus says this? What do you think it means? And I'll tell you if you're wrong, okay? So she says, what do you think it means? And eventually, when he doesn't understand, she puts her hands on each side of his head. And today in the 2020s, she would be sued for child abuse just for doing that as a teacher. She touched his head. And so she touches his head. She says, what's in between my hands, Chuck? And he says, absolutely nothing because I'm a Steelers fan. What genre is this? Is this comedy too or what? No, it's not what he says. He says, I don't know. What do you mean? What's in between my hands, Chuck? And then she goes on, I'll put it in my own words, to just basically teach him the profound truth that his mind contains all of his memories, all the people that he has relationships with, all of his imaginations, all of his hopes, all of his plans, everyone you know, everything you've learned, real things and imagined things, the whole world. And every year that you live, that world will get more detailed and more complex. She said, it will become a universe, Chuck. You contain multitudes. Don't you wish you would have watched the film now? I see you're like, I wish I would have watched this. It's a beautiful truth. And then she says, isn't that wonderful? Which is a key word. Because then, from this affirmation by this poet and her teacher, Chuck adapts a motto, which is in the trailer. And he says, I contain multitudes. I am wonderful. Very similar in a lot of ways to what David said. Otherwise, his ordinary life isn't insignificant. It's an ordinary life, but it is not insignificant. It is extremely complex, filled with layers of experiences and joys and stories that have rippled across the lives of other people. So the life of Chuck is a celebration of a simple but valuable life. That's what this whole story is about. Such a simple life, but yet so complex. And even the simplest life can be profound. Every life matters. Even if it looks mundane from the outside, I contain multitudes. And so I want to be clear this morning. Your story matters to God. And because of that, your story matters to me and so many people here, God's people, God's church. Because it matters so much to him, it matters so much to us. I mean, think about all the people you know that are here. All the relationships that you have developed. Some of those people are long gone, moved away, or passed away. Think about all those people. Think about all the experiences that God has given you. All the imagination that God has given you. Think about the gifts and the talents and the skills that God has blessed you with to be given in service to others. Not just for yourself, but to be given away, that we can all say, I contain multitudes, and I praise you because I am awesomely wonderful. God, you have done a remarkable work in creating me as an individual. And so one of the things that's huge in the movie, but I'll save several things for you to discover on your own in this, is that Chuck has a passion for dancing. And it's a huge part of the story, how he learned to dance and the gift he has to dance and how much he loves doing it. And you know what? I think one of the toughest things in faith, just to be super honest, I think one of the toughest things in living a God-honoring life is to have the great faith that it takes, and it takes a lot of faith, to believe that God can use whatever gift he's given you to impact someone's life for an eternity. I can't tell you how much that has to be a constant reminder for myself, that God can use the gifts he's given me to really impact a life and to maybe change their eternity. Like, they could be in heaven partially because I used a gift to serve them, to love them, to teach them, to cook for them, whatever it is. And that takes incredible faith to believe God can actually use this offering to make a difference. And so you have to believe that God fashioned you in the womb, has plans for you and a purpose for you in this real, gritty world, and he's the hound of heaven. He is chasing down all the people that I love, and he won't go away, and that maybe he can use my gifts. And that's faith in God. That's not a swagger that I believe in myself and in my gifts. That's faith in God it takes for you to offer your gifts, skills, and talents and say, okay, God, I'm going to give them to you. I'm going to use them regularly for you. Can you really change a life for an eternity with this? Sarah Johnson at Momentum is a great example of this. She's a talented photographer who is a part of Momentum. And whenever we have a free event here where children, parents, grandchildren, pets take pictures with Santa or the Easter Bunny, she's here giving her time and her talent taking great photos, because she's incredibly talented, and basically having the great faith to say, me being here doing this might lead someone to Jesus one day. Like that people just might become and get blessed with free pictures that they could have paid $8,000 for at the mall. That's what, just rounding to the lowest thousand, that's how much it costs to get pictures in a mall. And she's like, God, I believe you enough that I'm going to show up and I'm going to give what I have. It takes great faith to believe God can change someone's eternity using your gift. Because it's just simple. It's just ordinary. It's just what I have and what God has given me. There's somebody at Momentum who told me last week, I know that in their backstory, they used to be homeless. They used to be addicted, kind of like the guy that wrote Hound of Heaven. And he told me last week, I saw a homeless guy the other day. He goes, and I went up to him, and I said, are you using? And he said, yeah. And he said, man, I used to be homeless. There is hope for you. Like, God can still use your life. And I prayed with them. I am telling you, that takes great faith to believe it's even worth having that conversation and praying that prayer. Am I right? That takes great faith, because most of us are like, I wouldn't take the time because it's not going to make a difference. That's faith in God. It's faith believing God could do something with this and maybe begin, man, God, I praise you because I contain multitudes, so many experiences that I've been given. Some of them are bad experiences that I can now use for ministry, but I am awesomely wonderful, and you have a purpose and a plan for my life. And just off the movie for one more second, into the movie for one more second, your faithfulness in simple matters matters. Like, that's highlighted so briefly in Chuck's life. He was scrupulously faithful to his wife. Man, it matters if with your simple life you are scrupulously faithful to your spouse. It matters if, like Chuck, you are sacrificially faithful to your kid in being a parent. Those simple things, they matter so much. If for you to find a rhythm of using your passions, whatever they are, from numbers to dancing to photography to whatever it is, that you would find a rhythm of using your passions for eternal purpose and for God's kingdom on earth. That stuff, faithfulness to that kind of stuff matters, and it takes faith to stick to it and stay in the marriage and stay faithful and to continue to invest in kids and to use your gifts for God's glory. So I'm saving lots of the reveals, trust me, and mysteries for the film. But there is one spoiler I will give away, and that is a spoiler that is revealed early in the movie at the end of Act 3, which is the first act. At the end of Act 3, we see Chuck lying in a hospital bed, and he's dying from a brain tumor. And he's surrounded by his wife and his son, and his son says, with tears in his eyes, not believing that his dad, who is so young, is dying right in front of him, he says, only 39 years. And his wife says, 39 great years. Thanks, Chuck. Whoa, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? 39 great years. Thanks, Chuck. That's what we've been seeing and hearing in ads all over the city. And that's when we begin to realize this isn't a literal apocalypse that we've been seeing early in the film. It's not a collapse of the world. It's the collapse of a life. And so the world-ending imagery represents Chuck's internal universe, the things here that are deteriorating, and the memories and the people living within his mind fading as he is dying. Chuck's mind is shutting down because he's dying from a brain tumor. And it's a fascinating concept, but can I also be really honest with you? It's a very secular concept. So there's hope in this film. It's very inspiring. It makes me cry. It makes me feel good. It inspires me, but the hope ends at death. That's what Stephen King's message is, very, very clear in strong ways that I won't reveal. His message is so clear. You have just so much time in this world, and when you die, everything dies with you. That's Stephen King's message, and it's a very secular message. So here's the deal. When you invest in God's kingdom, when you believe that He knit you together in your mother's womb and has a plan and a purpose, things He would like to use you for in this world, your internal universe doesn't fully collapse. all that stuff here doesn't disappear and go away. In fact, in the words of C.S. Lewis, an eventually Christian writer, you will outlive the universe. Think about that. This universe, which is so epic, you will outlive this universe because you have a relationship with Jesus and are promised eternal life by Jesus. So to those who follow Jesus, you will follow him through death into resurrection the way that Jesus went. You will follow Jesus through death and the resurrection. And so much of what's between your ears will continue on for an eternity. You will be able to continue developing your gifts that you have developed on earth. You'll continue that in eternity. You'll continue to invest in some of your relationships that you had here. Some of those relationships continue in eternity. They don't disappear and crumble and go away. You will continue to make it, the impact that you've had on earth will continue on for an eternity because some of those people will be in heaven partly because you used your gifts and your time and your treasure to get them there. I want to share an epiphany that I had with you once. Now, this is going to seem, it's almost silly to share because to you it's going to be like, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's one of those simple, profound moments from my life. So when I was about 22 years old, I was doing an internship in Louisville, Kentucky. I was engaged to this smoke show named Shannon, and I was like, man, I'm going to marry that girl. She was doing student teaching, and so she had my car in another part of Kentucky, and so I was walking to work in the morning to this huge church that I was doing an internship at. I was walking along this road called Hikes Lane, and as I walked along, I saw people driving, and I could see in their faces, they're just feet away from me, like a curb and then them. And they're in gridlock traffic, and they look up, and there's this big billboard that says, "Thank you, Chuck, for 39." No, that's not what happened. They're driving along, and I'm looking into their faces literally, and they just look like morning zombies, like most of us probably look like when we're driving to work. They look so tired and unhappy and uncaffeinated, and they just like drive along. And I speculated in my mind, I made this up in my mind, they look so unhappy. And I'm walking to work, and I'm like, I wonder how many of these people had dreams, had things that they wanted to do. I'm going to be an accountant. And they didn't do it. And maybe there were plans that God had for them, but they broke in their relationship with God. And God's like, well, I'm going to have to use somebody else to fulfill those plans because you're not being obedient to me. And there were things that God wanted to use them to make an eternal difference. And they just looked so unhappy that I pictured, what if some of those people just missed out on how God wanted them wanted to use them, and they just are off mission, and they're unhappy, and they're unfulfilled. And I remember at that time saying, I'm 22 years old right now. I've got pretty much my whole life ahead of me, and I've got this one life to put faith in God and to say, God, what risks are you calling me to take? I'm going to be scared, but I don't want to chicken out. I want to do those things, whatever they are, to make an impact with whatever you have given me, and to believe that you can use those gifts that you've given me to actually make an impact. And so whatever jobs you have for me in this life, God, I want to take risks, and I want to trust you to make the biggest impact I possibly can with my one and only simple life. And that moment of clarity, honestly, I looked back on that for so many moments in my life when we felt like, Shannon and I, who did follow through and married me, thank God, when we felt like we had to pray with and wrestle, are we supposed to move to Washington, D.C. to be a part of it? We don't know anybody in Washington, D.C. And I remember looking back in that moment saying, okay, one, we want to know if God's calling us there, but I'm not going to be afraid to move there just because we don't know anyone and we don't like politics and, all that stuff. This church in D.C. is reaching unchurched people, and those are my people. And it was just like, this is a chance to reach the kind of people that I think God wants me to try and reach. When I started preaching in a bar on Sunday nights, a notorious nightclub that had been busted for all kinds of things, and they gave me an opportunity to come and start talking about Jesus as people sipped on whiskey and tried to pick up other people. I stood up there and talked about Jesus week after week. One of the things that gave me the guts to do that, which I felt totally out of my element doing, was that moment. Like, this is an opportunity. God's opening a door. I'm not going to chicken out. I'm going to take this opportunity. When we would go in the community and serve strangers, people stuck in gridlock traffic, and we had iced down waters to give to them in the name of Jesus while they sat there sweating in D.C. humidity. That was one specific thing that I remember being like, I feel so uncomfortable serving people like this. But God, I'm not going to chicken out because this time that I had that kind of epiphany, and it goes on and on and on, writing and recording songs like Baby Got Book or Shooters. Like, here's an offering. I want to create spiritual conversations through these songs that some might hate, some might make fun of, but some might talk about them, and some might think about Jesus. The reason we left DC and came to Momentum, not just, it wasn't the soul thing, but it was an inspiration of, again, we're going to start a church. We don't know anybody in Northeast Ohio, hardly anyone. But it was like, man, I've got one life that God has given me, and I don't want to miss my opportunity to be used by him and to accomplish whatever plans he has for my life. And my point is this. I was 22 years old. Anyone can make that decision at any point of their life. To say, and I'm not talking about, I'm going to go out there and be a social media influencer and get popular. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be some famous singer that everybody hears because I want to be known. I'm not talking about fame or selfish ambition. I'm talking about taking faith risks with your simple life and using what God has given you. Today, you can resolve to let God use your simple but awesomely wonderful life for his purpose and his plans. Today you can decide that. I'm not using my gifts at all. I'm not putting faith in God at all that he can do this stuff through me. This is the day. What are you waiting for? Get in the game. Dance like Chuck. You contain multitudes. Praise God because you were awesomely wonderful and you were made for a purpose. Let's pray.